So what must be accounted for is the fundamental difference between the Western religion's emphasis on power and control and the Eastern religious emphasis on knowledge and the intellect. This is part of the flip I'm talking about. Hence, the Christian God punishing Adam and Eve for eating from the tree of knowledge. Why is God punishing Adam and Eve? For seeking knowledge. Why is he doing this? Because the highest virtue in Christianity is not knowledge, wisdom, and the intellect, right? The highest virtue is power and control, ultimately, right? That's why the kings in feudal Britain, for example, in England, it was all about how if you had the biggest army, you win, not the best ideas, right? So the Persian God puts no such restrictions on mankind. Let's talk about like Ahura Mazda, for example. Instead, his angels are tasked with helping humans in their quest for knowledge and realizing, coming into their divine nature. Right? So that's the flip. That's a big component of the flip that happens between Eastern and Western religions. So the faiths of the Judeo-Persian worldview honor the intellect and wisdom as the highest of virtues. Right? Judaism is a religion of knowledge and wisdom. Right? It honors the intellect. The Jewish people, of course, have a kinship, have a history and a kinship and an intellectual exchange, a long history of this with the Persians that goes back at least 3,000 years. In the Judeo-Persian tradition, everyone could learn how to read. So in ancient times, it wasn't just for the upper class. The most intelligent among them became the holy men, right? They would be the leaders of the civilization. It makes perfect sense. They would come up with the religious ideas and the philosophy. They were allowed to marry, right? Rabbis can get married, right? Catholic priests can't get married, right? There's a fatal flaw here. And let me explain what that is. Thus, the rabbis getting married, they would choose intelligent women and have intelligent children with, right? So the most intelligent among the Christian priesthood throughout the history of the Catholic Church were unwittingly made extinct from the greedy doctrine of celibacy, right? So think about that. Think about the wisdom. If you're a faith or a religion that your highest virtue is wisdom and knowledge, right? Then you better follow through on that, right? And you're going to. And you realize that if our rabbis don't get married and we don't have, because our smartest people are rabbis in these old times, right? In ancient Israel and in the times of old Persia, if these rabbis aren't getting married and making more smart people, eventually we're going to start running out of smart people, or we won't have as many, right? But that's not the way the Catholic Church was thinking, right? The way they're thinking is we're going to extract wealth, money, power from everyone, right? So they educate their priests to a very high level, by the way, right? The Catholic, for example, the Jesuit tradition of education is very, in my opinion, is very high level of education, despite some of the doctrines that I don't agree with. But think about this. If you just educate these men to a very high level, and there are some very brilliant men that came out of the Catholic, that came from the clergy, of course, right? Very brilliant. But they never had children, right? So you can see what the highest virtues are in Christianity. And they're not knowledge, right? It's not wisdom, right? Otherwise, why would God be punishing Adam and Eve for eating from the tree of knowledge, right? I know this story of Adam and Eve is older than Christianity, right? But the teaching, the implications of it are seen differently in different religions, right? They're interpreted totally different. So despite today's political climate and the world that CNN attempts to shape for you, Iran hosts the single largest population of Jewish people of any Muslim country at around 30,000. There are 11 synagogues that exist in Tehran alone. Iran, like India, has historically been a nation of seekers. This legacy is easy to see today despite the strong influences of its little brother, right? The Islamic extremism that swept into Persia during the 7th century. The Greco-Roman and Christian persecution of pagans was simply meant to create an enemy in order to justify stealing the wealth of non-Christians. Because remember, the Persians coming from the East, they're more refined, they have a big empire, they're wealthy, they're educated, they're sophisticated, right? And in Greece, you're a leader or what have you. The Greeks are looking to the East and seeing these people and going, we want that. How do we get that? Right? And unfortunately, the core teachings of the old Persian religious traditions were corrupted, right? One thing is for sure, the Western Christian tradition often acted like a child, determined to be nothing like its father, right? So the child is this kind of doesn't have the child hasn't lived very long, right? And so they lack perspective, and they don't want to be like their father, right? I don't want to be like him. I don't, I'm different than him, that kind of thing. And unfortunately for us, the Christian church succeeded in this endeavor, in breaking away from their big brother or their father, right? By the way, a very good book if you're interested in Jewish philosophy. The Khazari is very interesting if you want to read like a really dense, some dense nuggets of wisdom. I think the Khazari is one of the best as far as when we're talking about the perspective of Judaism. Again, I don't have any specific religion, so I don't endorse any religions, but I think that there are some very wise teachings to be found in all traditions, including Christianity. I know that there may be some Christians watching this thinking I'm just bashing Christians endlessly. I guess it's probably easier for me because I was raised in America and there are lots of Christians around, and but yeah, no. And I'm not, of course, there are a lot of great teachings and wisdom traditions in Islam as well, especially with Sufism. I find that incredibly beautiful. If you want to learn some really interesting things about Islam, I say look into Sufism. It's beautiful. Okay. This is a quote from Stephen E. Flowers from the book that I referenced in the first part. This book is called Original Magic. This explains, of course, how magic came to us from Persia. He says, one of the most striking aspects of Muslim theology is that there is no strict distinction between spirit and matter, right? So that's kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier about there's no difference between religion and magic, right? So it's also true that there's little distinction, if at all, between spirit and matter. Really think about that. That's pretty profound. Among the so-called Abrahamic religions, there always seems to be a great division between magic and religion, right? They are conceived as being in stark contrast to one another. Scholars of the history of religion have long since discarded this model. It appears to be something that was emphasized by the priests and the mullahs of these religions to prevent individuals engaging in operative theology. Operative theology is just a term that means you are exploring your own spirituality. You're realizing your own divine nature in your own way, right? Because everyone's path is their own. Everyone is going to understand their own spirituality in their own way, because no one has had the experiences you have. No one quite sees the world like you do. No one has exactly the same gifts you have, right? So this operative theology is completely your own way. You need some, in the beginning, you need some wisdom, tradition, you need some teachings. You need a rough little framework here, but you need some training wheels. But after that, it's up to you, right? In fact, as we discussed earlier, there is a difference between sorcery and magic. In a sense, original magic is merely the work of operative theology, undertaken by individuals for the sake of their own personal development and to maximize their opportunities for well-being, success, and wisdom. In short, happiness. To the Christian establishment, the beliefs and practices of the Parsi, depicted here, are considered pagan and against God. This is a Parsi Zoroastrian winter ritual. They, of course, honor the four elements, and there are several fire temples in that area of the world where the same flame has been burning for thousands upon thousands of years. Some say as long as 4,000 years, if not longer. So in the upside-down world of Christianity, and I know, sorry not to pick on Christianity, but it's kind of true. In the upside-down world of Christianity, good is bad and bad is good. And when I say that, I mean in reference to, if we compare it directly to the religions of Persia, the old religions of Persia, the original tradition of the Magi, then this is true. When one takes a good look at the true origins of monotheism, the Western worldview flip becomes crystal clear. Okay? The WWF. Here's a quote, and this is also from Stephen E. Flower's book, Original Magic. In the Abrahamic religions, the entity seen as the divinity or Godhead is commonly called Jehovah, and he is more or less opposed by the adversary. This is the literal meaning of the name Satan. Satan in Hebrew means opposer, right? One who opposes. Because of the nature of Jehovah in Hebrew mythology, see the book of Genesis, as an entity who jealously guards the secrets of knowledge and eternal life from mankind, people living in cultures dominated by this myth naturally rebel against this conception of God and take the side of his rebellious adversary and the minions of the adversary in the name of the acquisition of knowledge and eternal life. God is seen as the oppressor and his opponent a liberator. Given this model, the use of demons in magic in the West is understandable, right? This is something in Western magic I've never really liked. I've never really liked this idea of invoking demons to your aid in order to perform different rituals, get what you want, that kind of thing. I never really liked that idea. Personally, I like the idea, but I understand why there would be a rejection of God in the West. It's clear. It makes perfect sense, right? But would you prefer a God that wants you, that encourages you to seek knowledge and want? Of course, right? That's kind of the way I see it anyway. I know some people that are into magic may disagree, and that's fine. This is just my perspective. These, and this is talking about the magicians of the West, right? The magicians that we think of. Such magicians are not pursuing evil as such, but rather the goals of personal power and self-deification, right? They're realizing their own God essence in their own way. And there's nothing wrong with that. If it works for you and that's the way that you want to go, then by all means do it, right? Better yourself, and in turn better your the people in your life too, the people that are around you. Because the Mazdan tradition is logical and philosophically grounded, this model is impossible in a Mazdan context, right? So from an Eastern point of view, there is, from a old Persian point of view, there's no need for this conflict because God is for you anyway, right? God is in your corner, right? He wants you to succeed, right? Ahura Mazda wants man to be powerful, immortal, and attain cosmic knowledge. This is why man was created, right? So it's another way to think about magic, isn't it? It's a very interesting way, because I've always felt that a rejection of the Western image of God, while it's definitely founded in, it's definitely something that I am on board with. I think that going to the side of this, going to this place of black magic and these kind of things, is kind of, I'll be honest, it's kind of masturbatory. And once you realize that there is a different worldview of God being on your side and like being open for you to practice any way you want, right? And to discover your own divine nature any way you want to, then the whole allure of black magic and Satanism and all that stuff kind of, once you mature your worldview on religion somewhat and see that, oh, wait a minute, this Western idea of God is just a complete flip from the true image of God is creating you and then wanting you to flourish and succeed and realize your God essence. It makes more sense to me. Maybe some people will disagree, and that's totally okay. But I just see the whole black magic thing and the allure and the mystique kind of loses its impact once you realize that you can pursue your spirituality any way you want, and you don't need this. You don't need to. I think people just like being able to have some power and control and scare people, and black magic and don't mess with me, and I can do some things to you, and that that attitude of control, that attitude of power comes directly from the Christian church. And that is the corruption that comes through directly to the church and is still carried into the realm of black magic in a lot of ways. I know there's plenty of people that do practice magic that are not like that practice all kinds of magic that in the West that are not like that. But I think there's a certain subgroup, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. So I may have struck a nerve with some people that are hardcore Satanists, but you don't really need that idea if you understand God in a more universal sense, I suppose. Or at least if this speaks to you, if the idea of an idea of an Ahura Mazda type of divinity, however you want to interpret that, right? Because then there's no real fight, right? You're wasting time and effort anyway. I think you're wasting energy in this way. So that's just my own perspective. So I'm sure I'll get some comments about that, but that's just my perspective. So here's another quote. This is a continuation of the quote from the book of Original Magic. It is important to realize that this should not be understood as some being from outside the essence of who you are. So I know that some folks that are really into like black magic are going to say, well, this god of Persia you speak of, for example, Ahura Mazda, is also separate from you, and but it's not. It's you need to stop taking the Western lens of your understanding and placing it over the Persian understanding. They're completely different worldviews. But once you get your head around the Persian or the Indian worldview on religion, things just make a lot more sense. It just makes so much more sense. Okay, I'll start with this quote. It is important to realize that this should not be understood as some being from outside the essence of who you are. They're talking about Ahura Mazda. Rather, it is the very core of your being, usually hidden from you. By gaining awareness of it and reforming yourself in accordance with its character, you are really becoming who you are. This individual being is perhaps not what you imagine yourself to be, or what your undeveloped self might wish it were, but rather the honest shape of the spark of the divine, which you embody and you were meant to discover as the mystery of your life. Other traditions might see this spark of the divine as a god or goddess in its own right, whereas the Mazdan tradition clearly sees it as part of being truly human or superhuman. So the Eastern idea of monotheism, and by the way, I'll do another series on monotheism versus polytheism, but monotheism in the East, and like India, for example, completely misunderstood in the West. Completely misunderstood. Polytheism isn't what you think it is at all, or what I presume you think it is. Maybe you know more about it than I do, though. And I'm just learning about polytheism, but I'm realizing it's not real. It's just a label that is put on by the West. So the imprint left from the Persian Magi and its subsequent evolution through modernity is easily seen once you know what to look for. These influences are much more than stylistic, however. They are archetypal, right? After all, it were the Persians that set the archetype for our laws, our philosophy, our religion. Since the origin of the Magi come from a time when the mind of man operated in the age of myth and magic, it is easy to see why the dominant worldview of science would completely reject it, right? However, it does so at its own peril, since the wisdom handed down from the age of myth and magic holds as much psychological value as Carl Jung would certainly attest to. There's a lot of value to be had from ancient religions, from the ancient religious teachings. You'll even find it in Christianity. You'll find nuggets in there too. In the age of science, the predominant way of viewing our world is informational, literal, and empirical. The way most people think in any given time in history is affected by the predominant philosophy or worldview of that given era. Much of the traditional wisdom of self-development has been forgotten and then miraculously rediscovered again by those wishing to teach their own modern scientific worldview. Okay. What I'm talking about there, especially with psychology, is, in Jung's final book that he wrote, he laid it all out there and he said, my influences, my insights were from studying the ancient mystic traditions, studying the literature, reading about what they were trying to give to future generations and some insights about humanity and mankind, right? There's a lot of ancient psychology. I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense because humans have been around roughly, give or take, about, in our current form, 300,000 years? Somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years. And you're going to tell me right now, only in the past 6,000 to 8,000 years is when, are we at the end of that 200, 300,000 years, in the past 5,000 to 6,000, we're now just in the past 100 years, 200 years, understanding the human psyche? Are we so sure about that? So the wisdom of our ancestors, through great struggle and sacrifice, made it possible for us to be here, right? For better or for worse, we, today, right now, we are the inheritors of the great human story, standing at the top of a pyramid built by millions of years of tragedy and hope. We're like the end result of tens of thousands of years of human struggle. You sitting in your chair right now, wherever you are, you're at the top of the heap of all of the human beings that had to struggle, find food, had to fight wars, had to figure out how to build a house. I mean, all of these things, all of this tragedy and hope that came. Think about that. You're the inheritor of all of that. There were so many human beings that did anything they could to survive, just so us as human beings could get this far. And this is where we're at today. Right? So think about how we have to honor that in some way, right? We have to honor our ancestors. We have to honor the people that came before us. They knew some things. There's some things they didn't know. There's a lot of stuff they didn't know, but there's some things they did know. And we need to learn those things. Unfortunately, this isn't taught in school, right? Unfortunately, when you go to school, you're trained to be a good office employee. When you go to college, you're given all this busy work and all these tasks, and you're running around and doing all this. It doesn't really matter what you're studying unless you have a very specific profession. You want to be a lawyer, a doctor, if you're very specialized. But if you're general, if you have an English degree or, underwater, underwater acrobatics, and that kind of thing, you're neither of those groups, though. The strict professional, or I would say maybe like the casual college student, you're not sure what you want to do. Neither these things aren't taught typically unless you're part of a tight-knit community, a religious tradition, you're in a tribe, But these things need to be taught to all people, because this human legacy, it's all of ours, right? It belongs to all of us. We've inherited this, and yet so many of us don't know any of this, right? So it's someone's got to do it, right? Someone has to. We need to talk about this more, right? This is something that we want. We all want to be happy. We all want to better ourselves, right? And no one's ever showed us. Maybe someone didn't show us this or that, right? Well, we have to seek these things out. So that's what we're doing. So according to one's disposition, there's two views on the ancients. Let's talk about our ancestors, or let's talk about the ancestors from this land, the Native Americans, right? According to one's disposition, our ancient ancestors are either revered as all-knowing wisdom keepers, whose way of life hold the key to our own salvation if we only listen. There's that view. There's that group. Then there's the other group, who think our ancient ancestors are mostly irrational and backward, and their ways should be abandoned completely, as they were only rooted in superstition and fear, right? I would say both the romanticism of the ancients and their wholesale exclusion seems to be on either side of an extreme fallacy. Could it be possible then that both are true in certain respects? Of course, right? Certainly every epoch, I think there's an H in there, certainly every epoch in human history must have produced the seeker and the wisdom keeper in roughly the same proportions as the production of the buffoon and the fool. we have no shortage of buffoons and fools these days, right? Just go look around on YouTube for a while. Go look on Fail Army or something. Probably there was far less buffoonery possible in ancient times, right? Because life was harder. You couldn't really screw around that much, right? Nowadays you can. I mean, we have it so good. You can you can be a fool. You can be a buffoon, and you can make money on YouTube. So these ancient traditions, I mean, they're the reason we're here. How did we make it this far? I mean, how did we make it? Sure, there were a lot of wars, there was a lot of disease, there were a lot of struggle, a lot of starvation. But there were enough people, enough wisdom keepers, and enough people willing to listen that we at least got this far. How much further we're going to get? Well, who knows? It depends on us. And we need to look at the traditions, the wise traditions of our ancestors, and find out what's they know there's some certain ancient psychology, and there's some certain truths about human beings that have been with us for a very long time, right? And we can't forget those. And we trying to rediscover those is kind of silly too, because that just wastes more time. Why reinvent the wheel, right? Let's find the traditions that have already been laid down, that are already telling us what we need to know, and then let's step into the new, right? So that is the end of part 3, and this is a Parsi fire ceremony. I don't know very much about the Parsi people. These are Zoroastrian people, but there's a lot of references, of course, to the Zoroastrians and the religion, the Mithraic traditions of Old Persia, of course. So this is the end of part 3. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, give me a like, leave a comment. If you're into black magic, leave me an angry comment, or not. Maybe this changed your perspective in any sense. It's certainly, this research project has certainly changed my perspective, and I've become more open to learning about the Eastern religions, and I'm also, I it sounds like I beat up on Christians and people that are into black magic, but you have your own path, and I think that's what's most important. And if you better yourself and you better the people around you, then it doesn't really matter what else you choose. What specific style of spirituality you choose, right? If any. So thanks again, and I will see you guys next week.